All right, so we're going to talk about non-diatonic chords. So what does that mean? We've been working with the key of G up to this point when we've been talking about the diatonic chords in the G scale that would belong to that. So what we mean when we say non-diatonic is that we're going to encounter a chord that falls outside the key of G and does not belong to that chord progression. So in the key of G, we have G obviously, and then we have A minor would be the second note of the scale, and therefore the second chord in our chord progression. If we see an A minor, we know we can play our G scale over that because we have notes that make up the G chord on it, or in this A minor chord. Well, if we were to play an A7 dominant chord, I'm including the G there, so that makes it a flat 7 chord or a dominant chord. That C sharp in there is not part of the G scale. So when I see this chord pop up, I know the chords that belong to the G scale, so therefore now I know which ones don't belong. This chord does not belong, okay? So any A major chord does not belong. Most of the time it will show up as a dominant chord or the one that has the flat 7. So let's say we did a chord progression in the key of G that just went G to A7 and then maybe to D. Right, for our purposes now we're just going to deal with this A7. Okay, so when it shows up, what we know, first thing we know is that we can't play our G scale. So what do we do? Well, the answer is always in the chord. So if I can just make the chord, make the 3 notes that make up the chord, any inversion of them you can find. If we're playing in open position, or if we're at this end of the neck, this is going to be the most obvious one. You know, you can make your A chord there, or however you make it, but just to try to grab the chord. So play the arpeggio, and that's the 3 notes that make up the chord. Okay. I'm going to go to this position here. I'm going to go to the open 5th string. So that's A, and then there's the 3rd, which is C sharp, to E. So 1, 3, 5. Remember, a chord is made up of 3 notes. All right. I'm going to go here because from now on, when we start to build things and start to create different ways of attacking this chord and approaching it, it's going to be, I think, easier for you to see here. We could play it down here as well, but I'm going to put it here. Okay. So the first thing is to play the arpeggio. Okay, the A chord shows up, and I do that. Okay. The next thing I can do is play the arpeggio, and then add an extension to it, which would be, in this case, we'll just add the flat 7. So if I'm playing an A scale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, an A major scale would have G sharp. In this case, that's flat, therefore the flat 7. Okay, here's G. G also occurs here, so if you play an A7, you'll see that G showing up right there. Okay, what I can do is add that flat 7 after I have my arpeggio. So now I can add that note as well. Okay, any combination of those notes in any kind of rhythmic pattern. Okay. All right, so that's the next thing you would do: arpeggio, and then add the flat 7. Okay. We can then add, so at this point we have 4 notes, so let's just say we just want to keep adding as many possibilities as we can. So if we make it a 5-note scale, we are of course at our pentatonic, which we've talked about, and that's penta meaning 5. So for A, I would play 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Remember, we leave out the 4 and the 7 for the major pentatonic. Okay. When you run into these dominant chords, really, if you run into any chord, your problem is, what do I play as far as the 7 goes? What happens to the 4? There's a lot of questions and a lot of problems we run into. What we do with the major pentatonic is just throw those out. We throw the 7 out so we don't have to deal with it. So that's why a lot of this stuff, the major pentatonic, will work over a lot of different things. So it's always a good guess, no matter what form of the chord you're running into. For dominant, we're just leaving out some of that stuff. So we just have 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. All right. So it goes to that chord. I'm in G. Goes to A. Okay. Any of those notes are going to be safe notes. Okay. Now we can really start to get a lot more interesting if we now will create the major blues from the major pentatonic. Okay. And as you can see, a dominant chord there are a lot of possibilities, which is a good thing, right? We're starting to add some different things here. So what we do for the major blues is we're going to go 1, 2, and we'll add the flat 3 to the major pentatonic. So we have 1, 2, flat 3, keep the major third. Everything about the major pentatonic stays the same. There's the 6. Right? So that starts to get a little more interesting. Most of the time when we run into a dominant 7 chord, there's that tension anyway, which is wanting to resolve to something else. And so just adding that flat third just even increases that just a little more, so that's a good thing. All right. Just going down the line here, now the next thing we can do is we can play our minor pentatonic. So we go to A. Remember the way that we're going to number the minor pentatonic, the notes of the minor pentatonic are going to be 1, flat 3. Okay. Remember for A, the third is C sharp, so we flat that. It's the flat third. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, and flat 7. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. Okay. Now you may be saying, well, how is it that I can play the flat 3 against a chord that has the major third there? It's just the way the blues happen to work. And a lot of times you can't just linger on that note on the flat third, but you can play minor pentatonic against a major chord. It's a pretty cool thing, all right? So you're going to play, okay, that's against that A major chord. All right, and then finally the last thing we can do is we'll take that minor pentatonic and we'll add the one note that makes it the blues scale or the minor blues scale. Remember, when somebody refers to the blues scale, they will be referring to this one and not major blues. So if we say the blues scale, we mean the minor one in this case. So we're going to go 1, flat 3, 4, and then flat 5, or sharp 4, or sharp 11. All right, so we're going to add that note. And then we have the 5 and the flat 7. So everything about the minor pentatonic stays the same. We just add one note, right? And that starts to really get cool, okay? The major blues is still a little happier, still closer to the major pentatonic. Now the minor blues related to the minor pentatonic starts to really get out there. And so this is how you would build things, okay? So you start off with the arpeggio. Do it here. Add the flat 7. So we're adding one note there. Then you'll do your major pentatonic, major blues, minor pentatonic, now minor blues. Okay? So that's pretty much the scope of what you can play over a dominant 7 chord when it shows up out of the key. Now you can always chromaticize and play different, play notes that fall outside the key, but at that point it becomes almost a random chromatic run where you play little half steps, and it's not quite as codified and as easy to talk about as it is this, because it's more random. So I wouldn't say this is everything you can do, but it almost is. So now we're going to go to the circle of fifths, and we're going to look at Alabama Jubilee and just see how all this practically fits in a tune that has the circle of fifths progression. So we'll talk about that next. All right, let's talk about the cycle of fourths. You may have heard about the circle of fifths. Cycle of fourths is the same thing. If you look at the wheel that has a circle of fifths, cycle of fourths will go the opposite way. We talk about the cycle of fourths because it's really practically how music tends to go when it gets into this cycle. For example, if we start with an A7 chord and we count the scale up 1, 2, 3, 4. If the cycle of fourths then means that we're going to go to the D chord in this case, right? So we're on A, 1, 2, 3, 4 is D, right? This also will be a dominant chord. All right, now we're on D, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're at G, and then we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll end back at C, which will be our home key, theoretically. And so this progression is the beginning of Alabama Jubilee. It's the progression that happens a lot in swing, and a lot of bluegrass, country, everybody will use this cycle of fourths. So you can still call it the circle of fifths, but as you can see, it functions as a cycle of fourths. What ends up happening is when we get back to C, this cycle of fourths is basically broken because we're going A, the 4 is D, the 4 is G. When I get to C, the 4 should be F, right? I'm on C and I go 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, it doesn't do that. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to A. I'm going to keep this thing going. So since it's broken, that means when I arrive at C, I have a different game plan. And something's different about C. And therefore, I can actually play major scale there. We're going to call that the home key, right? And then it starts all over back on A, okay? So if we look at Alabama Jubilee, when you see this cycle of fourths happening, if you can just see the pattern, every chord in that progression is going to function as a 5 chord or as a dominant chord. And so all the things that we talked about for A7 in that chapter are going to apply to every one of these chords. You're going to have all those options for every one of these chords. Again, when it comes back to C, you're going to tend to want to be more in a major sound there, more of just a diatonic thing. But so let's look at A. We've already done A, and so we don't need to go through that. What I'm going to do now is when we go to D, we'll just quickly look at the same options we had for A. We're working through the cycle of fifths, circle of fifths, cycle of fourths. So here's D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so those are the notes of the scale. So what I would do is I would play the arpeggio first. Remember, the answer is always in the chord. So the 3 notes that make up the arpeggio, D. And I add the 7. You can do it a couple of ways. Here's 1, 3, 5. There's the chord, the arpeggio. You could add the C up there. That's the flat 7. Or I could add it here. Okay? All right, then I go to the major pentatonic. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Right? We'll do the same options that we went through with A7. All right? Then we make the major blues out of that. 1, 2, flat 3. 3, 5, 6. Okay. Then we're going to make the minor pentatonic. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. And then I'm going to make the minor blues out of that. And we add sharp 11, sharp 4, flat 5, all the same thing. Okay. So in other words, you could play maybe over A7. We've not gotten to G yet. So far we got A and D. So maybe you play over A, major pentatonic. When it goes to D, maybe you play the minor pentatonic or the minor blues. Right? So you can mix and match, do all kinds of things. At first, just start with the arpeggio. Don't get too crazy. Okay. All right, and then we'll go to G, and you're probably starting to see how things work now. We get to G, we got the arpeggio. So you got 1, 3, 5, the arpeggio, and I'm going to add the flat 7. Okay, I go to major pentatonic. I'm just doing these in one octave. Obviously, you have the octave down here, but we're just keeping it in one place for now. There's major pentatonic. Add the major blues. And we're going 1, 2, flat 3. 3, 5, 6. Okay. And then the minor pentatonic. Okay. And then we add the sharp 11. Okay. So now you've got A, all the options for that, all the options for D, all the options for G. We go back to C, and now we are back home, again theoretically in the home key. You could play all those things over C, but the only problem is when you have a dominant chord, you're tending to want to resolve to something, pretty much always the 4 chord. That's the idea of what's happening here, is that the A wants to resolve to D. Now that becomes the 5 that wants to resolve to C. That's the 5 that wants to resolve G. G wants to resolve to C. Now if you play a dominant chord C, that's wanting to resolve to F. Well, it's not going to F, it's going to A. That's why you can get into trouble once you get back in your theoretical home key if you play anything other than the major scale there. You can sneak a little bit of stuff in like the major pentatonic, just because at that point you still are kind of major sounding, but just have to be careful about that. But okay, so so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to get my buddy Mickey to come, and I'm going to play through the Alabama Jubilee, the first part of it, through that progression, and we'll show you how you can mix and match and make some of this stuff happen. All right, got my favorite rhythm player, Mickey Abraham, back here with me. And we're going to do Alabama Jubilee chord progression, which will be A, 7, D7, G7, C. We'll just do the first part of the tune. The second half goes to some different chords. But so what I'm going to do is take all the concepts that we've talked about with the circle of fifths, cycle of fourths, and how you would play those over dominant chords. I'm just going to improvise and show you the possibilities as you mix and match all those things, and so you'll kind of see how that works out. We'll kind of play it a little slower than breakneck speed here and see what happens. All right.
Sure.
I'll walk it in from C. We're technically in the key of C. All right. 1, 2, 3. All right, we're going to do another tune that has the cycle of fourths progression. There are lots of them, but we wanted to do one that would be a sort of a bluegrass classic. So this is Salty Dog. It goes through the cycle of fourths, starting on, it's the key of G, but it'll start on an E dominant, and then it'll go to A for a couple of measures. So the timing is not perfectly even, but it's still going through the cycle of fourths. So, all right, let's just do a couple of rounds of this, and you'll see what I mean. All right. 1, 2, 3.